What's up, guys? This is us coming at you with another episode of History in Matt's Backyard.
Hey guys, we're going to be talking about period 7 in American history today. That'll include everything from World War I to World War II. We're going to start with World War I, and one of the reasons World War I started is because of the Sussex Pledge, which allowed, or not really allowed, but pretty much said that Germany was going to sink any U-boat they saw. So that led to the sinking of the Lusitania, which sunk a unarmed British U-boat. So after that, the National Defense Act was put in place so that there was a draft and the nation's army was bigger. So
Sedition?
Alright, so the Espionage and Sedition Acts would kick out anybody who said anything bad about the government or send them to prison for 20 years. And this was a time where a lot of freedom was taken away. So Americans were scared to say anything about the government or talk bad. So this led to things like the Bolshevik Revolution and the League of Nations, which was introduced as Wilson's 14th point in his famous 14 points. After this, there was a lot of what was called dollar diplomacy, and that would become the nation's new foreign policy. This led to a lot of interventionist ideas and the idea that America needs to expand again like they did with the Manifest Destiny back before. This would lead to America having stations for their army in many countries, and what would end World War I would eventually be the Treaty of Versailles. So that's World War I.
Hey guys, we're going to be talking about the 20s. So there's two basic parts of the 20s here. We have the post-World War I feeling of consumer culture, which brings upon the Jazz Age. Everyone loves the Jazz Age. We have Langston Hughes. We have radio, movies, cars and planes being bought and used, spectator sports. Everyone loves baseball, especially our cameraman Luke. And birth control. Go women's rights. So basically, everyone knows the story of the Flappers. We learned about that a long time ago. Flappers were these wild girls who decided to defy the norms of society, and it was really progressive for women's rights. And another group affected other than women was the African Americans. The first Great Migration was the movement northward of plenty of African Americans from the south to the north in search of jobs and to escape racism. And this led to the formation of the NAACP and other organizations to help advance for the rights of colored people. And the Harlem Renaissance also came as a result, as I mentioned Langston Hughes earlier. Lots of music and poetry came out of this movement. This also brought along modernism. So, straying again from religion, as a pattern has shown in history, we had a shift towards intellectual movements. Albert Einstein was very famous during this time for his theory of relativity, and other scientists like him for their more intellectual ideas. Another African American movement that was very popular during this time was Garveyism, that also went along with the Jazz Age and other African American movements that were very important to the advancement of colored people. So another part of this is the Armory Show. The Armory Show basically sums up the end of the Jazz Age as a artistic show that set a new standard for art. And that's pretty much all the fun part of the 20s, so now let's move on to the boring part of the 20s. Who doesn't love the reactionary 20s? So there was a lot of discrimination during this time. Mentioned the Great Migration earlier. So there was a lot of nativism. The Immigration Act of 1924 got passed. Always good to mention in some sort of LEQ or DVQ. Who doesn't remember the Sacco and Vanzetti case, whenever the poor guys got beat up for just being who they were on the construction site. Another important thing that happened during this time was the Scopes trial, as we can remember that it was the unlawful teaching of evolution in a classroom, and this brought up the debate between modernist and fundamentalist views, which is a likely topic on the exam. Prohibition was in effect during this time, and we know all the problems that go along with that. Let's see here. Progressivism was obviously on the rise, as it was after both World Wars, and the Teapot Dome scandal occurred, which pushed away from Harding's presidency towards Coolidge's new views. This led all up to the Great Depression. So, the Great Depression started as a result of overconfidence in the stock market and overspending and underproduction of goods, mixed with high taxes by the government. And not only did this destroy our economy, but it destroyed Europe's economy too. So, it's a pretty good time.
All right, go ahead. So picking up on the Great Depression, as Trevor mentioned, families were suffering, poverty was on a rise, unemployment was also high. But as soon as the year of 1923 came about in the election, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president and won the election over Herbert Hoover. Roosevelt proposed two new deals. The first one, which would include relief packages or acts and to businesses and to more families. Like in the first New Deal, he would include the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Agriculture Adjustment Act, and finally the National Recovery Administration, and so many others in the New Deal. But however, in the New Deal, he would have so many critics because so many people felt that his ideas he used other people, like Huey Long or Francis Townsend, or even the courts were even against the New Deal in some aspects. Then the second New Deal with the WPA, the Wagner Act, and Social Security were many benefits for the American people. However, in the second New Deal, they would have the court packing, what they called a court packing scheme, where people felt, and some government officials felt, that Roosevelt was abusing power, where they would be changing democracy into more of a dictatorship. So that didn't really work out for him. And with all this going on in the United States and America getting back on its feet, war breaks out in Europe for World War II. Germany and Italy would invade and capture the majority of Europe, and Japan would seize power and domination in China. With all this going on, this worries the Allied leaders like France and the United Kingdom, England, and the United States. So during this time, America shifts roles from being isolationists to interventionists. Before the war, they decided to stay out of conflicts due to World War I. But however, as the war progressed, they shift more to interventionists with the Lend-Lease Act, Neutrality Acts, and this is when Roosevelt adopted a phrase of arsenal of democracy by supplying allied countries or warring nations that are going to be defending the ideals of freedom. And then the final push to the test of America is Japan. When Japan invades the United States and attacks Pearl Harbor, this is the final push for interventional means, where then this would include the United States in World War II, and they would invade Europe and liberate Europe and liberate the Pacific countries. The Allies would win in Europe, but with the Allied victory in the Pacific, Americans, atomic bombs would be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that would change the world, and that would bring to a new age of the Cold War.